All right, I'm going to get us started. I know you guys are back there getting food. So keep getting the food, but I'll get us started so we don't get too far behind. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jürgen Unitzer. I chair the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here. And today is my great pleasure to welcome our grand round speaker, Dr. Dilip Justi. I'll say a few things about Dilip and then we'll turn it over to him. Dilip is an amazing human being and an amazing person in our field in psychiatry. And when he gets done today, you'll get a little glimpse of that, but I'll have to say a few other things before he gets started. He is a professor of psychiatry at UC San Diego. He also serves there in a very unique role as the Senior Associate Dean for Healthy Aging. He has a bunch of other really important roles and titles that are not on this slide, and we could probably spend a good part of today just going through that. He just told me, a few minutes ago that he's into a whole new venture on healthy aging, on artificial intelligence, and the microbiome. He is one of those people that I think about every 5 or 6 years, he discovers a whole new part, a new area of psychiatry, and he doesn't just dabble in it, he just gets into it. He has some very, very long-term commitments in geriatric psychiatry. I think he's turned half the people who work in geriatric psychiatry today onto this field, starting in medical school. I think one of his most amazing accomplishments is really thinking about what comes after us, who's the next generation, and how do we really get people excited about what we do in psychiatry and in behavioral health care. The other thing he has done is he has worked for his entire career with a focus on people who live with really, really serious mental illness, in particular schizophrenia, and that's what he's going to talk with us today about, what happens when people with schizophrenia age. And I see on his title, it says good news and bad news. Most of what I hear from Dilip is good news. There probably are some bad news, but he is one of those glasses half full kind of people who embraces new ideas, embraces stuff. A couple years ago, he got into a whole new area called positive psychiatry. This is a book that he edited that I recommend to those of you who want to sort of a little bit of a different perspective on our field, which is often very deficit oriented. We are a field that's really good at enumerating in all the myriad of ways we can all the things that are wrong with us, with people who live with mental illness. And you can also take a very different approach to this, thinking about it in a more positive way. These are just a couple of the highlights of the kind of things that I think make Dilip a really, really special person. So it's a pleasure to have him here, to have him as our grand round speaker, and I welcome you up. And thank you so much for coming to meet with us.
Thank you, Jürgen, for a very kind introduction. It's really a pleasure being here. This is my, I think, 5th or 6th trip to UW, and it's almost like second home. I mean, there are so many good friends and colleagues here whose work I respect. And Jürgen is, I would say, that easily one of my most favorite colleagues, friends, and chairs. And he has been actually an inspiration and role model for many others. And same thing for Peter Weeds and Sean Neumeyer and several other people who really have been great friends and colleagues for so many years. So thank you for having me. So as Jürgen said, I'm going to talk about schizophrenia and aging, good news and bad news. So in terms of disclosure, I have no financial relationship with the pharmaceutical industry. These books I published at some small royalty. So I'm going to begin with bad news, which is the physical and biological aging. Then the good news, which is the psychosocial aging in schizophrenia. Next, non-pharmacological interventions. And finally, as Jürgen mentioned, positive psychiatry, that is successful aging with schizophrenia. So when there's good news and bad news, which one do you give first, right? So I went to the ultimate source of wisdom, the Godfather. And some of you may remember this Marlon Brando character. His assistant said that Mr. Corleone is a man who insists on hearing the bad news immediately and then the good news. So I thought we should follow that role and starting with the bad news. So this is not the godfather, but father of psychiatry, Emil Kraepelin, uh, who first, as you know, used the term dementia precox. Among other things, one thing, Kraepelin was a great observer. And one thing he mentioned was that people with schizophrenia do not just have mental illness, they have a lot of physical morbidities and that they die young. So he said, besides the psychic disorders, there are also in the physical domain a series of morbid phenomena to record. So this is something that has been known for very long time. And increasingly, I have come to believe that schizophrenia, it's not just a serious mental illness, it is also a serious physical illness. People with schizophrenia have 2 to 12 times higher mortality, and this mortality is not from brain disease. Proportion of people with schizophrenia die from suicide, but that proportion is very small compared to the number of people who die from so-called natural causes. And what are the natural causes? Number one, heart disease, two, certain cancers, three, stroke, four, GI disorders. This is the exact order of causes of mortality in the general population. They're not dying of dementia. At the death, their brains look pretty normal. Uh, and yet there is 15 to 20 year shorter lifespan. So there's a diabetes, metabolic disorders, heart disease, some cancers. There is also earlier onset of generalized aging associated pathological changes like insulin resistance, immune activation, inflammatory syndrome, larger ventricles. Uh, so this suggests that there is accelerated physical or biological aging in schizophrenia. What is most worrisome is this. Ellen Lee, she's my fellow. She wrote this paper that was published in Schizophrenia Research last year. What she did was she looked at longitudinal studies of mortality in schizophrenia starting in 1930s. Actually, Ming Swan was the author of the very first paper that was looking at mortality from 1930s through 1970s. Um, and what she found was that the longevity gap between people with schizophrenia and the general population has increased by 37%. So what is called the standardized mortality ratio. So that's a ratio of mortality in a given illness like schizophrenia um, to the mortality in a similar age general population. So it used to be 2.2 in the pre-1970 studies, and it is 3.0 today. So what's happening? It is not that people with schizophrenia are necessarily dying younger. What is happening is that the average lifespan has increased phenomenally. It used to be about 40 years in 1900. Today it is 80. Although actually just the news yesterday said that it has dropped in the last 2-3 years. I'll come back to that toward the end of my talk. But anyway, so average lifespan has increased. And why? Because of better healthcare, better nutrition, uh, more emphasis on activity, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, those longevity benefits have not been transmitted to people with serious mental illnesses. I mean, it's a shame on the society that we have a significant proportion of population who are not benefiting from these advantages in the health that the rest of us are experiencing. So why is there accelerated biological aging in schizophrenia? Multiple reasons. One is behavioral. We all know smoking is very common. Substance use is very common in schizophrenia. Unhealthy diet, part of which comes from poor socioeconomic status, poverty. So they can't afford um, more healthy, richer food. Sedentary behavior. Biologically, and I will show you on next few slides about the biological mechanisms: inflammation, oxidative stress, metabolic disturbances, attitudinal stress, um, pessimism, low self-efficacy, and finally environmental: poverty, stigma, antipsychotics. Antipsychotics contribute to obesity, metabolic disorders, and poor access to healthcare. So all of these things contribute to accelerated biological aging in schizophrenia. And I think one of the most important underlying mechanisms may be what is called inflammation. So this is inflammation of aging. Um, Human aging is characterized by chronic low-grade inflammation. Acute inflammation is good because acute inflammation helps to remove the irritant from the body. But when it becomes chronic, that's when the problem starts. So chronic pro-inflammatory processes can damage tissues and lead to oxidative stress, metabolic dysfunction, cellular damage, and diseases and death. So how do you measure this systemic inflammation? So there are some blood-based biomarkers that are a reasonably valid intermediate phenotype of the aging process. So we have been looking at a bunch of cytokines and chemokines, which are markers of inflammation. The best known of the cytokines is HSCRP, high sensitivity C-reactive protein. And so here you can see on the slide, the blue bar indicates healthy subjects, controls, and the red bar indicates people with schizophrenia. So both in women and men, see that people with schizophrenia have significantly higher level of high sensitivity C-reactive protein. There is also some gender relationship. And this is something very interesting we are observing. Women with schizophrenia seem to be at a bigger disadvantage than men with schizophrenia. That's surprising because typically men are thought to have worse prognosis. In any case, we find that also more severe negative symptoms, greater medical comorbidity, and worse metabolic risk factors like BMI, glucose, hemoglobin A1C, they're all associated with increased HSCRP. But it is not related to age, race, education, smoking status, antipsychotic dosage, or cognitive impairment. So that was about inflammation, insulin resistance, or metabolic disturbances. So HOMA, which is the homeostatic model assessment for insulin resistance. So it's a ratio of fasting plasma insulin to fasting plasma glucose divided by 22.5. It has been shown to be a reliable and valid measure of insulin resistance. It has been used in literature on diabetes and other metabolic problems, strongly correlated with BMI, not surprising. Again, you see the same thing, that both in women and men with schizophrenia, the values are significantly higher than those in controls. We also looked at leukocyte telomere length. This is in collaboration with Elizabeth Blackburn's lab at UCSF. She was a Nobel laureate. She's no longer there, but her lab is still continuing to do these assays for us. In general, leukocyte telomere length is correlated inversely with age. This is well known, that it is a marker of biological aging. Here again, we find a significant gender by diagnosis interaction. In women with schizophrenia, the telomere is significantly shorter than that in women controls. That's not true for men. So in general, we are finding that women with schizophrenia seem to be doing worse. In addition, what we found was that this was related more to younger women. And I think this may be more of a cohort effect, that with these sodas and this fast food being more common, especially being in younger people, I think we may be seeing more of an epidemic of obesity in younger people, including younger people with schizophrenia. And for some reason, women, it's not clear why that is so. Anyway, we'll follow that finding and let you know. So that's the bad news, that people with schizophrenia have worse physical health, they die young, and unfortunately, that mortality gap is widening. The good news, though, is on the psychosocial aging. And most of the rest of my talk is on good news, actually, because this is something we can do something about. And I really think the mortality gap is not so much because of biology of schizophrenia. It is to some extent, it is. But largely, it is because of the poor health care that people with schizophrenia receive. In other words, this is something under our control. And if we follow the principles of positive psychiatry, it will have impact not just on their mental health, but on their physical health as well as their longevity. So Kraepelin called schizophrenia dementia precox. His idea was that this was a dementing disorder. And by dementia, he didn't mean dementia like Alzheimer's. By the way, Alzheimer and Kraepelin were colleagues. They worked at the same time, same hospital. And apparently, Kraepelin was responsible for Alzheimer's disease being called Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer did not return the favor to say schizophrenia should be Kraepelin's disease. In any case, so Kraepelin's idea was that schizophrenia was associated with personality deterioration. What we find, though, is that that's not the case. The course of cognitive impairment is relatively stable. It doesn't go down faster. And there is improvement in psychotic symptoms, even improvement in some negative symptoms. People become more adherent to treatment because they have learned from experience that when they stop taking medication, they become suicidal. They need hospitalization. They don't want that, so they become more adherent. Older people with schizophrenia get hospitalized not because of psychosis, but because of the physical problems. And look at this slide. So this is what I call paradox of aging. And that paradox of aging, by the way, applies to general population also. So here you see this scale SF36, the world's most commonly used scale for quality of life or well-being. And it has two components, physical and mental. The physical component is the red line. So what you see is that the physical health declines with age from 40 to 90. Not surprising. Look at what happens to mental component. It actually improves with aging. Now, what is mental component? So this is self-rated scale in which there are questions about general energy, vitality, stress, pain, and in general, they seem to improve with age in schizophrenia. And one common explanation is that this is a survivor bias or healthy survivor bias. These are people who are lived into old age. That's not necessarily true. We have been following some of these people for 30 some years, and they typically improve with age psychosocially. And you all have, I'm sure most of you have seen the movie Beautiful Mind, true story of a Nobel laureate who was diagnosed with schizophrenia in his 20s. He started getting better as he got older. At age 50, he stopped all treatment. At age 60, he went back to doing research. He wrote a paper for the first time after 30 years. The Nobel Prize was based on, of course, what he did in his teenage years and early 20s. He was on faculty at Princeton. And he was a keynote speaker at the APA a few years ago. So just imagine somebody with schizophrenia being a keynote speaker in his 70s. Wow. Another example, Ellen Sack. Some of you may know her. If you have not read her book, please do so. The Center Cannot Hold My Journey Through Madness. She is professor of law and psychiatry at University of Southern California in LA. And I'm actually very proud that we have been collaborating for the last 20 years. And we have about a dozen papers written together. An amazing person, really. Somebody who is a brilliant thinker, lawyer, psychologist. She got her PhD in psychoanalysis, ethicist, writer, speaker, and advocate. So now, Why do people with schizophrenia, as they get older, do better? So we have been looking at uh, the positive psychosocial factors, things like optimism, happiness, wisdom, resilience, perceived stress. And we find in general, compared to healthy subjects, the schizophrenia group has lower levels of these positive factors. Not a surprise, right? I mean, if this is a serious mental and physical illness, how can people not be more pessimistic, right? But there's considerable heterogeneity. And as many as a third of people, patients with schizophrenia, have levels of resilience, optimism, self, whatever you name it, in the normal range. Moreover, we find that these positive factors are significantly related to better mental and physical health, not just mental, but physical health, and importantly to biomarkers of inflammation, including IL-6 and insulin resistance, that is HOMA-IR. So talking about optimism, resilience, it is not just some feel-good TV science. It's actually biology that is associated with better even biomarkers. We published a paper a few years ago in schizophrenia research called Happiness in Schizophrenia. And so Ellen Sachs used the term wellness within illness. So happiness and schizophrenia, we would think they don't go hand in hand. Well, we found that, let me show you the next slide here. So this shows level of optimism in healthy subjects, that's on the left side, and then people with schizophrenia on the right side. So clearly, people with schizophrenia overall, the mean is lower than in controls, but third of the patients, about 37% actually, have scores in the normal range. And that's remarkable. In spite of this serious physical and mental illness, they are doing still optimistic and feeling happy, right? Wisdom. This is a brand new thing. We have that paper actually under review. I'm not talking about wisdom today, but that's one of my favorite areas to talk about. If there are questions, I'll be happy to discuss that. But I do think that wisdom is a real thing. It's a neurobiologically based personality trait that has different components, including compassion, self-reflection or insight, emotional regulation, and so on. And there are scales to measure wisdom. We published a paper also on neurobiology of wisdom, looking at the areas wisdom is best. My point here is that we looked at wisdom in schizophrenia and in controls. And once again, the mean scores are lower in schizophrenia. Again, not surprising, but there is an overlap again. Third of the patients do as well. And so why is this important? So here, so we divided people with schizophrenia into tertiles based on their wisdom scores. So the lowest tertile, intermediate tertile, and highest tertile on the wisdom score. And this shows the scores on a scale for everyday functioning. Everyday functioning is what matters really. So these are things like ability to use transportation, financing, leisure activities, so on and so forth. People in the highest tertile of wisdom scores in schizophrenia have significantly better everyday functioning than people in the lowest tertile. And their functioning would be similar to that of normals. And I'm not going to talk about right now, but there are ways in which you can improve optimism, resilience, wisdom. And we don't think about applying those to people with serious mental illnesses, but we should. Okay. And this is actually my most favorite data slide. So we looked at childhood adversity. We used a scale, the most commonly used scale for measuring childhood adversity, and we found that childhood adversity was much more common in schizophrenia than in healthy subjects. Not a surprise at all, right? Then we found that also people who had childhood adversity had worse health, mental and physical, and well-being than people who had no such history. Not a surprise. And this was true both in schizophrenia and in the healthy controls. But high level of resilience. And see, childhood adversity is something that happened decades ago. Resilience is something we are measuring now, because we couldn't have measured resilience when they were growing up. So resilience is something we measure now. So high level of resilience today seem to make a significant difference to health, well-being, and biomarkers like insulin resistance in both schizophrenia and healthy subjects, which were associated with childhood adversity. So if you have severe childhood adversity and high resilience, your level of health, mental and physical, well-being, and biomarkers like insulin resistance is equal to or even higher than people who had no adversity and low resilience. So when we see people with schizophrenia who had childhood adversity, there's nothing we can do to that history of adversity, right? But we can do something to their resilience today. So if we were to improve the resilience, we may be able to reduce the adverse consequences of the childhood adversity. Again, this is the theory. I mean, we didn't prove that, but there is increasing evidence suggesting that there is a lot we can do today that will have an impact on their not just psychological but physical functioning. Because I used to be a psychopharmacologist primarily, and much of my early research was on psychopharmacology. And I must say, over the years, I got somewhat frustrated that the drugs, I mean, they're definitely useful in reducing symptoms. And in many patients, we can't do without them, no question about that. But they also have side effects. Their efficacy is limited. They control symptoms. They don't cure the disease by any means. But they don't necessarily improve the functioning. They don't teach people how to manage the finances, how to take the transportation, how to enjoy life. And that's where psychosocial interventions come into play. And I'm blessed with a group of colleagues, many of them psychologists, who are experts in developing the psychosocial interventions specifically for middle-aged and older people with schizophrenia. And what I'm proud about, these are all NIH-funded randomized controlled trials. By that, I mean not comparing drugs with psychotherapy, but psychotherapy plus drugs with drugs alone, okay? And these are all manualized interventions. If you want a copy of a manual or paper, just email me. I'll be happy to send you the manual as well as a paper. So one is cognitive behavior therapy plus social skills training, Eric Granholm's. Functional adaptation skills training, Storm Patterson. Diabetes awareness and rehabilitation training, Chris McKibben. Vocational rehab, by Twombly. Latino version of this functional scale, that is Jesus Bucardo, and finally mobile intervention, Colin Depps. We'll talk about a couple of them briefly, so you have an exact idea of what I'm talking about. So this is a combination of cognitive behavior therapy plus social skills training. This is a group intervention over a period of 6 months, once a week group. So this was a study with 79 people with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder who were randomized. I mean, they were all on medications, and the medication did not change during this period. Okay. So they were randomized to either cognitive behavioral social skills training or a control intervention. And in this case, the control intervention was an active control group, not waitlist control. It was a goal-focused supportive contact. That means these people also came 1 hour, they spent. So 36 session weekly group therapy and blind assessments at baseline, 4.5 months, 9 months, 13.5 months, 18 months. And one of the measures was defeatist performance attitude. As you know, one of the problems in treating schizophrenia is lack of motivation. Apathy, amotivation are one of the core features of schizophrenia. And so it's associated with defeatist attitude. Why should I take medication? They're not going to help me. Or why should I go for psychotherapy? I'm just condemned to this illness the rest of my life. So this therapy, so this study showed that both treatments, very effective in reducing amotivation, depression, anxiety, positive self-esteem, and life satisfaction. However, the CBSST had significantly greater improvement in the defeatist performance attitude. That's really remarkable. We are talking about middle-aged and older people with schizophrenia with decades of illness, in other words, decades of defeatist attitude, and with 6 months of therapy, you could significantly improve that. That's really remarkable. Medications can't do that. And it was associated with better functioning in that group. And some of that improvement was retained several months after the treatment ended. Supported employment. Can people with schizophrenia get and retain paid jobs? And that to middle-aged and older people over the age of 45. So my colleague, Beth Twomley, she got this R01 from NIMH, and this is the study. So she compared individualized placement and support. So when you put them in a job, you need to give them support. I mean, you can't just put a person in the job because it is stressful and it might even induce relapse in a person. But with that support, and this time unlimited follow-along support, the control group was what the government does. The county has this vocational rehab. If they go there, they find a job and put. She found that there was noticeably greater improvement. And I mean, this is statistically significant, but you don't even need statistics, right? With this, so the upper line shows vocational rehab with support, and the lower one shows the conventional rehab program. So significant improvement in getting job and staying on the job. That's the more important one. Psychosocial interventions in schizophrenia actually have biological effects. These are studies not done by us, but a couple of the groups. The first is a study by Sofia Vinogradov. She used to be at UCS at that time. Now she is a chair in Minnesota, right? So she showed that with the therapy she used called cognitive remediation in chronic schizophrenia patients, there is significant improvement or the significant increase in the level of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, compared to the controls. And this is even more remarkable, I think. So this is a study from Pittsburgh and Harvard. This is Jerry Hoggart is cognition enhancement therapy. Pretty intensive therapy on a weekly basis for improving not just cognition in a narrow sense, but essentially functioning in people with schizophrenia. And the investigators did structural MRI before the study started and after the study ended. And there are a control group that received other therapy, but not cognition enhancement therapy. The red areas are the ones that showed significant increase in gray matter in specific parietal temporal regions following this cognition enhancement therapy. Now, we don't know what increase in gray matter on MRI mean. I don't think it necessarily means increase in neuron. That's unlikely. It at least means some gray matter change. It may be increase in number of synapses, blood vessels, whatever it is. But think about that. Psychotherapy in older or middle-aged and older people with very chronic illness for decades, and that produces changes on the structural MRI. Wow. I mean, this is something you see at the most with intense physical exercise. So that's the neuroplasticity which you can see even in people with schizophrenia. So we are just starting a new study, and I must say this was one of those studies inspired by Jürgen Unerzer's early work. So the goal here is we want to improve the lifestyle of the patients with schizophrenia. The reason is that I mentioned, they die of heart disease and diabetes and so on and so forth. And the reasons are smoking, sedentary lifestyle, unhealthy diet. How can we improve that? So we are doing this study in what we call board and care homes in California. So these are licensed residential care facilities for people with serious mental illnesses. So these are facilities you may have anywhere from 5 to 50 patients. These are privately operated. There is no medical staff. There is not even a nurse, but there are some staff members who make sure that these people live there, they get their food 3 times a day. They are not allowed to drink or use any substances. That's absolute no. Smoking, they can smoke, but there are certain areas for a period of time. And patients usually stay there for the rest of their life. I think something like 70% of 80% of their social supplemental security income goes to pay for it. That's how they can afford. So we thought that these would be great areas for intervention because you can make changes. If you go to people with schizophrenia one by one, you can't really change their diet or even activity or smoking, really, right? So there are 4 components of this intervention: patient and staff education, healthier diet, which you can do because they all eat the same food, so, right? Physical activity, smoking cessation reduction. Anyway, this is a study the money came in last month. So maybe next time you invite me here, I will have some data to present in the next 5 years. Okay. Then briefly about the mobile intervention. Again, we are moving into the era of technology, and then this old idea that we can run groups with and these PhDs and even nurses, social workers, I think it's not feasible. I think we will have to use technology increasingly for dissemination of intervention. So my colleague Colin Depp, he's actually focusing on that. When he initially did a study, and I wrote a grant proposal for using mobile phones to be given to people with schizophrenia for therapy. And the reviewer said, well, it is not possible. People with schizophrenia, how do they know? How they will not be interested. They will drop them, lose them, break them, whatever. Not true. Actually, pilot data showed there is a minimal dropout rate, no broken devices, adherence was similar to that in non-psychiatric populations, high participant satisfaction. As a matter of fact, these patients felt proud. I mean, they could show around to others how that I'm carrying this phone. So, show the feasibility and acceptability. And recently, okay, this is actually just-in-time intervention. So you can assess these patients wherever they are almost continuously. So you don't have to wait till they become so depressed that they are suicidal and then they're coming to the emergency room. So Colin showed that an early sign of suicidal behavior is decrease in their physical activity and sleep, which you could measure using technology. And so he just got a grant from NIH again, where he will actually translate that into action. Okay. So this is the future of health technology with Fitbit to the middle one, upper line. So that's a video camera. And then on the right side is the kiosk. So you sit on the kiosk. It will not only measure your blood pressure, temperature, etc., but in near future, it will measure your EKG and transmit that information in real time to the emergency room. Then below, there is this Nintendo Wii, retirement community. The lower middle is the telemedicine from home using Skype or Zoom. So you don't have to go to the ER. They can watch you from there and then tell you whether you can go there. And the last one is robot. Actually, there's an article on robots just a couple of days ago about these robots as companions for people with older people, including people with dementia. as Jurgen mentioned, we just got funded. This is a 5-year, $10 million grant from IBM on establishing an Center for Artificial Intelligence for Healthy Living. And so I'm the co-director of the healthy aging side. Microbiome side is the other one, and we have a great microbiome center. Rob Knight is the PI of that. And the idea is to bring together researchers and trainees in AI, aging, neuroscience, and health sciences. So this is not for people with schizophrenia. It is for earliest diagnosis of MCI, mild cognitive impairment. Sort of looking at the earliest signs, not clinical, but using sensors, that and including microbiome as a biomarker. I wish I could talk about microbiome, but I'm not going to for the sake of time. If any questions, I'll be happy to. So this is my last part. The talk is, so what do we do with that information? And where do we go from here? So successful aging with schizophrenia. So the strategies for successful aging, I mean, this is common sense, really. Healthcare, therapeutic healthcare, preventive healthcare, and this includes mental health care as well as physical healthcare. Stress reduction. We all know the importance, psychotherapy, meditation, mindfulness. There are now emerging theories, emerging studies of meditation, mindfulness, etc., and yoga for people with mental illnesses. Then diet, calorie restriction, and the so-called superfoods that are rich in antioxidants, green leafy vegetables, fruit, etc. Physical activity, cognitive activity, sleep hygiene. Sleep is one thing. With sleep problems become increasingly common with age. There is no medication. There is no good treatment for sleep problems. So now there's actually increasing emphasis on this sleep hygiene, where that is you have a glass of milk before you have some light exercise, don't eat heavy food meals. Wine, etc., are bad for good night's sleep, so on and so forth. I mean, we'll still continue drinking wine, but non-toxic meal, no smoking, drinking. Okay, so actually, increasingly, I've come to believe that we need to, the psychiatry needs to change. When I was APA president, my main goal was to come up with this DSM-5 publication and did that. And but DSM-5 is only one part of psychiatry, right? The diseases. If you open the dictionary and look at definition of psychiatry, psychiatry is defined as a branch of medicine that is concerned with study and treatment of mental illnesses. That means we define ourselves by the illnesses that we treat. But aren't we experts in mental health? So why should we define ourselves with mental illness instead of mental health? I mean, that applies to the whole medicine also, right? So, so during that time, actually, I looked at positive psychology. I Googled the term positive psychology, and I found hundreds, if not thousands of articles. Then I put the term positive psychiatry, zero. If you look at this, open the psychiatric journals or psychiatric textbooks, how many articles do you see on resilience, optimism, compassion, self-efficacy, wisdom? None, right? There's a large amount of literature actually on those, but that is in other medical literature or psychology literature or sociology or gerontology, not in psychiatry. So I thought it was important to think about that. So positive psychiatry is the science and practice of psychiatry and medicine that focuses on study and promotion of mental health and well-being through enhancement of positive psychosocial factors relevant to mental or physical illnesses. So when I talk about that, people usually say, but how can we practice it? I mean, we have 15 minutes to see a patient and hard time to, time not enough to shake hands and find somebody's name. So unfortunately, it cannot be substitute to what we do, but it can be addition to, it should be. So assessment of well-being, strengths, perceived stresses, lifestyle, how can we do that? We can do that actually easily. We send these surveys to patients before they come for appointment. They can complete them and bring them with them, or while they're waiting in the reception area, they can complete, right? So you will have that information. And using that information, then you can decide what kind of specific enhancement that they need. So that will help you identify the treatment targets, especially lifestyle and propose intervention. And use of technology, as I said, is clearly important in the modern era. So what happens? When we diagnose schizophrenia, today we prescribe antipsychotics. That's the most some supportive therapy. Instead of that, we should be prescribing antipsychotics, of course, but also cognitive behavior therapy, social skills training, specific exercise 5 times a week, cognitive activity. We have to define how is it possible. Healthy diet, but healthy diet that the patient can afford. Sleep hygiene, job, or at least volunteering activity, positive attitude. I mean, all of these things have to be there. And then my last 2 slides. Going beyond schizophrenia and mental illness, just think about this, what is happening to the society. I mean, we are just pandemics. These are the global epidemics, right? So we are used to epidemics in smallpox, cholera, polio, influenza, recently HIV, Zika virus. Those are the things that, these are all infectious diseases. And then what we do is people in those fields, they develop vaccine. So we eliminate those, right? So smallpox, for example, is now wiped from the face of the earth. The modern global epidemics are different. Opioid crisis, loneliness. You know that in UK there is a Ministry of Loneliness, and the former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, he wrote an article in Washington Post saying that loneliness kills more people than smoking or alcohol use. Loneliness is very common in schizophrenia. It is common in older age. Suicidal behavior. Again, yesterday there is a major news in most newspapers saying the rates of suicide have gone up significantly in the last 20 years or so, and the overall longevity is going down because of that. And this is happening at all ages. These are the modern pandemics, and they need vaccines, but they need behavioral vaccines. So what are those vaccines? Resilience, wisdom, social support, healthy lifestyle. And so these are all behavioral things. And who are experts in behavior? We, right? Psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, nurses who do that. And yet we don't pay attention to that. I think, right? But the good news is that we can. And if we do, we will have impact not just on mental illnesses, but really medicine as a whole. So instead of being a marginalized subspecialty, psychiatry can actually be at the center of the overall healthcare revolution. Let me stop here and thank you for your attention.
Big room, we have some time for questions.
Debbie.
Thank you so much for being a leader in this. I'm just wondering, the VA has started this whole health initiative that's actually incorporates all these aspects in dietary, exercise, and all this, but they haven't added the biological components, like drawing any DNA or serum and everything. I'm just wondering if you have any, I know you're not VA anymore, so I'm wondering if you have any insights on how we might interface, because this is implemented into all of it, almost all.
So the comment was about new initiative that the VA has started, and that's for improving the overall well-being through these different things that you mentioned. I think that's great. It's really terrific. This is something the healthcare system needs to adopt. But you said that it doesn't include the biological component of that. I think that's important because I do think that psychiatry, especially being a part of medicine, health becomes important in biology also, is as important as psychosocial aspect. I think ultimately the devil lies in details. It's a question of how do we implement it, right? And there needs to be support for making that possible. So if we continue the current healthcare system, I think that's not going to happen because the current healthcare system reimburses people for prescribing medication because that can be done in a short time and there is proof that you did something, right? It doesn't reimburse you for things that take time like psychotherapy for over 1 hour period. And you can't change behavior unless you really have intensive long-term therapy with the patient, with the family, the group, and so on and so forth. So I do hope that this kind of initiative, which is great, is actually translated into action, and there is support for that, including financial support. Yeah.
I was wondering if any of your data comes, or if you've been aware of any data that's come on a global level, so you could separate individuals and their individual outcomes based on the economic disparity of the country within that they live in, and if that affects not just the psychosocial factors that lead to isolation and loneliness, but also affects some of the biological outcomes.
So the question was about looking at globally whether the economy, especially, affects the well-being and loneliness and health, mental as well as physical.
And particularly disparity, not just global wealth, but the disparity.
Particular disparity.
Which has been known to cause medical morbidity and mortality, or be, like other violence, things like that. And so I was wondering if we have any of that data for schizophrenia.
Right. So the question is about, whether it affects even including things like mortality and morbidity. The disparity is the main issue. That's a point very well taken. And clearly, there is a disparity in terms of mortality that is related to the GDP, the gross domestic product, gross national product, no question about that. So money matters, clearly. Not just in terms of the medications, but also general standard of living. And that does impact. And that's like in the longevity gap is increasing in people with schizophrenia because even the same country, they are not getting adequate health care because they are socioeconomically disadvantaged. So there's clearly that disparity that exists. However, that disparity does not apply to level of well-being or happiness.
Not global, it's not like the GDP doesn't necessarily be defined, but the disparity within a country. So you can have equal wealth, but disparity within the country often defines the level of medical morbidity and loneliness and many other psychosocial ills. And so I think it's really important to design, interventions on the level of the VA or in our personal practice. But I think there's also potentially, some band-aiding and, like you said, not just of the medical system, but of structure itself, like our economy as well.
So it's a question of disparity within a country.
Yeah.
And there is no question about that. Actually, there are studies showing that disparities within a country are greater than the disparities across the country. So it is the bottom 1% of the population, socioeconomically compared to the top 1%. And the difference is humongous. So I think that's something clearly that needs to happen. And so that's where public health comes into play. And I think that should be one of the areas of focus for the country as a whole. How do we reduce the disparity? It is embarrassing and shameful for a society to have that kind of a disparity where the mortality gap is tenfold between the poorest and the richest. That just doesn't make sense. Yes.
A couple of other numbers. So this mortality gap we have that's increasing in people who live with severe and persistent mental illness, particularly schizophrenia, is a lot more visible here than it is anywhere else. And I think that's something we should be comfortable talking about and advocating about. So just to be really concrete, if you're born today in Seattle, you can look at an average life expectancy of about 80 plus years. If you then are the same person and at about age 17 you develop schizophrenia, it drops into the low 50s, right? The low 50s is worse than if you're born today in Bangladesh. So if you think about, everything else being equal, developing a serious mental illness like this puts you, from a life expectancy perspective, in places that we couldn't even imagine, right? And that's important for us to be able to call out as disparity. We're not going to advocate around that. Nobody else will care, right?
And I think when you try to address that level of disparity and the outcomes of those disparity, there is like real world interventions that you do between the patient and within your medical system, but then there are social justice sort of issues that need to be addressed as well in order to affect major change. Because positive psychiatry, I'm glad you're bringing this word and bringing it. I mean, it also existed in the recovery movement, psychiatry, and you know what I mean? But you're right, absolutely right. We absolutely need to sell it because the problem has not been fixed by any of our interventions. And I worry it's because we haven't addressed the underlying cause.
No, that's a great point. And it shows that actually we can do it. I mean, the fact that the average lifespan we have increased in the country means we can do it. So it's not a question of lack of knowledge or lack of resources. The question is we are not applying them to disadvantaged populations such as people with serious mental illness.
And that's where this question of, physician advocacy and activism and how we take, which you've done in your career, is taking a very active role in sort of not just your clinical work, but also how to work within politics and the structures that determine disparity.
Any thoughts, questions? Well, thank you very, very
Thank
much.
you.